I think we all learn better from stories than we do from numbers and statistics. So in today's video about what it takes to retire early, I want to share with you the story of another YouTuber that was able to retire at 54 years old. And his name is Kuhn. Now, I don't know Joe personally, but I have gathered the information I'm going to share with you by watching some of his videos. And it's very similar to my experience as a financial advisor meeting with somebody. So come on inside of the tent and let's talk about what enabled Kuhn to be able to retire early. First thing is Joe is very comfortable being Joe. In fact, one of his videos is just Joe. You know, I'm just Joe. And he's very comfortable in his skin, and he's not trying to impress anybody. And he shares that for many years at work, he drove the oldest car in the parking lot, even though he's a big shot at the manufacturing facility that he worked at. I believe he was the plant manager. So he's probably the top guy in the parking lot, but he drove the oldest car, which is the importance of looking poor and being comfortable looking poor. It can be really expensive when we're trying to impress other people, when we're trying to have status from other people. And you know, the reality is people don't care what type of car we drive. People don't care what type of watch that we wear, right? People care who we are. And Joe knew that, and Joe spent his money that way. He wasn't interested in keeping up with the Joneses. And it sounds like he had very little, if any, lifestyle creep as he continued to get promoted professionally. Just because he was making twice as much did not mean that he had to spend twice as much. You know, it's sad to say, but over half of Americans that make $100,000 a year or more don't save a dime. They save zero, nothing. And so Joe was able to be a good saver. So that's point number one. And point number two is being able to retire early is not just about the financial side of things. It's also about the mental side of things and the psychology. And Joe realized that Joe was not his job. There were many aspects to Joe. There are many aspects to Joe. And only one of those is his job. So he was not his job. He had interest outside of work. From his videos, I know that his family is really important. And not just his family and having good relationships, but actually being there. Joe talks about the influence that one of his uncles had that always made the extra effort when Joe was young to go to Joe's birthday, to go to Joe's wedding, to actually physically be there. And you know what? That takes time. And it's hard to balance it all when we're working 40, 50, 60 hours a week and we're trying to do these other things. So Joe had things outside of work that were important to him. The other thing, again, listening to Joe's videos, is Joe was retiring to something. And I think that's really important. It's important to have an idea of what you're going to retire to, as opposed to just saying, you know, I'm tired of working, you know, I'm tired of the commute, I'm tired of the politics. That's retiring from something. And you'll have that sense of relief initially if you retire from something, but for true sustained happiness, we need to retire to something. Now, just because you don't have what that retiring to something is, does not mean that you shouldn't retire, right? What that means is you've got some work in front of you, and we all have work in front of us. And so that's your homework, is figuring out what that retiring to is. And another thing that over half of Americans don't do, right? I said that over half of Americans making over 100,000 don't save a dime. Another thing that over half of us don't do is we don't use our vacation, which is crazy. So if you find yourself wondering, what am I going to do in retirement? You know what? Job number one is use your vacation time and start thinking about things like that. Go on adventures. Try to find what your next thing is. And for Joe, he knew that travel wasn't his main thing. It was going to be something that he does. He just recently did a cruise with his wife to Alaska. But for Joe, he knows that travel is not the main thing. And it's going to be different for all of us. Having listened to Joe's videos, I think the thing he retired to was the ability to spend more time with his family, the ability to focus on his health and to get as healthy as he can, right? Just like myself. Before I retired, I just did a video on my first 100 days of retirement, so I'm a little bit past that, but it's hard to do it all. And so frankly, you know, I was 20 pounds overweight, and I'm still probably 17 pounds above the weight that I want to be. And so Joe had that happen as well. And even just outside of, you know, our weights and being able to exercise, but it's, do we have the time to eat healthy? And beyond that, it's also just working creates a lot of stress on us. And there's just no getting around it. The workplace always has been and always will be a stressful situation, even if you had the greatest boss in the world. Part of, you know, my boss used to tell me, you know, work is a 4-letter word. And I had a great boss and he made work fun, but it's a 4-letter word because we still have to get results. And that means stress. Okay, let's keep going. The next thing that I noticed with Joe is, it seems to me he's got solid relationships. I've never met Joe Kuhn, but it seems to me he's got solid relationships with his spouse. He's talked about getting on the same page as his spouse about what retirement looks like. He's talked about what some of those bumps along the way were. Joe has talked about being generous with charities, particularly when he was working, and how the dollar amount had to change when he retired because he no longer had income coming in. So Joe has a good relationship with his spouse, and then when they have obstacles come up, it seems like they do a good job of working through those. And then they were also on the same page. It sounds like from his videos, both he and his spouse were together, were committed to raising great kids. That was one of the really important things for them. Okay, another thing that allowed Joe to retire early is, frankly, he got a good paying job out of college. Joe's undergrad is in engineering, and he got a good job with a Fortune 500 company. He never suffered through a layoff. So he was able to have that good job. He was able to keep it. If I had to guess, and Joe and I are almost exactly the same age, and we have a lot of similarities in life. In fact, after college, I went to work for a company that's very similar to the company that Joe went to work for. And at least my graduating class was one of the last groups of new hires that still had access to a pension. So I suspect Joe got grandfathered into the pension. In fact, I ended up working for my company for 5 or 6 years, and I'll get a teeny tiny pension just from those 5 or 6 years. And so I suspect after a lifetime, a career of working for a good company, if he had a pension, it's probably an attractive pension. But it's not enough to just, you know, make good money, to not, you know, get laid off, to have access to a pension. You also at some point have to say, when is enough? And I think Joe did a good job of looking and saying, I have enough. And the purpose of money is to allow me to live the life that I want. So those are the reasons that I think Joe was able to retire early. He saw the big picture, he lived his life well, and then he wasn't afraid to reach out and grab that brass ring at the end and say, I've won, and I want to grab the brass ring. And that's why I made this video here for the rest of us that aren't Joe Kuhn. And it's called Why Waiting to Retire Until We're 65 Years Old Might Be a Big Mistake. Thanks for watching this video. Bye-bye.